All right, everybody, we are back for another episode of Into the Absurd. We have a friend of Trenton Jones. It is Dylan James, which I got your last names mixed up like several times.
It's okay. My name is a Heracletian aphorism. You can read it forwards and backwards. It means the same thing.
Really?
Yeah. No, it's a joke. It's a last name is a first name is a last name.
Oh,
So so that, again, the idea is you can read it both ways, and it denotes the same object.
yeah, yeah. Well, so what's your background? How'd you get into philosophy? Where you at now? What's going on?
Wow. We could spend the whole podcast talking about that.
Yeah,
But I'll keep it short. Well, I guess maybe the short of it is I've always been interested in religious questions or questions of religious nature, right? So, what are we doing here? What's the destiny of man? Is there a destiny? Why do we suffer and die? Very, very straightforward questions that no one seems to have answer to, for it's an answers to pat of an explanation. And so I haven't quite psychoanalyzed myself to be able to figure out any of the true motivations behind my interest in philosophy per se. In that sense of very Nietzschean. So, we might have some sort of, might tell ourselves a narrative like, oh, I'm in it for the truth. And then you might realize you're actually just doing it to cope. Who knows? But I think I've always been interested in questions of religious nature, and I never considered it as a profession until I went to college and I started attending a philosophy club. And I decided to write an essay on philosophy and submitted it to I think it was the 2017 Eastern Washington Philosophy Conference. I didn't cite anything, never really bothered to do any research in philosophy, just wrote up my thoughts. I got accepted and I presented to contemporaries held my own ground. I thought, damn it, I'm actually pretty good at this. Maybe I should consider taking this up in my world of possibilities and cultivate it.
what
So
was
I
your
became,
essay on?
it's pretty standard epistemology. So kind of understanding uh, what I call at the time the trio of reality. So what we could be certain of, even if we doubt, so kind of Cartesian in that sense too. Uh, as I matured and began to realize I was basically a Kantian at the time, I had no idea because I was writing about the noumena, the phenomenon, and the transcendental subject the entire time without even knowing it. Which was interesting. And that's not to credit myself with anything, but just goes to show how much we're ensconced within a philosophy that informs us of our worldview to the point that I can write an essay in philosophy and be within the shadow of Kant and not even know it. So then when you become professionally trained, you begin to see, that shadow looming around. So yeah, anyway, so I submitted the paper, held my own, and then continued writing papers and became the president of the North Iowa Philosophy Club for a while. Then switched my major to philosophy, and then the rest is pretty much history. Had lots of really interesting experiences. So, like, I had a life-threatening experience that forced me to write an essay on the meaning of life about 5 years ago or so,
Wow.
because I realized I was going to die. And like I was saying
Yeah.
before we started recording, very much like Nietzsche and Heidegger, where I just have forays of thought. I never really bring
Yeah.
them together. But I was like, oh shit, I'm going to die probably. And soon people are going to ruffle through my papers and not understand anything. And I wouldn't have made a system. So I was forced to hang everything together. And that really made it very clear where I thought I got things right and where I thought I was really being stupid. So that was about 5 years ago now. After that experience, I took a couple years off and got married. Lived the domestic life, and then jumped back on board. And Nietzsche inspired me to double major in
Yep.
psychology when I got back on it. So double major in psychology and philosophy. I graduated this year from the
Awesome.
University of Idaho. Yeah.
Sweet. Yeah, no, I minored in psych. I didn't surprisingly enough, I did not minor in philosophy. I wish I did, but I didn't. Um,
Well, there's a difference between doing philosophy and being a professor of philosophy. And
yep.
so you're doing philosophy, and that's all that matters.
Yep, exactly. Um, yeah, no, I like the idea that you're saying that you've always been interested in questions of a religious nature, and you're saying,
Mm-hmm.
so why that choice of words instead of questions of like a philosophical nature, for instance?
No, that's actually a really good question. Maybe it has to do with the ambiguity within the connotations of philosophy. I imagine it as if I did an introduction to philosophy course, I might ask the classical question, what is philosophy? And then I get, responses from the students, and then I might say something like, well, the question is rephrased in everyday language as not what is philosophy, but why should we give a damn about it? Or what good is it? Or why should we do it? Right.
Yeah.
And this sort of implies, so before we even answer the question directly, we need to recognize that even that phrasing of the question presupposes a philosophy that you bring to the table to judge someone else based on what you think their philosophy is. So I believe as Dasein or human beings, we are fundamentally philosophical, and we can't live in the world without philosophy. So we're all unconsciously embodying a philosophy, whether or not we know it. And so ergo, we have certain questions about who we ought to be, what choices we are to make, what the nature of reality is, made up before us. So, for example, some plebeian father might be like, I don't give a damn about philosophy, and then we'll go to the voting booth and tell everyone else how to live with his vote, go to church and endorse the metaphysics, and then go home and then tell his children who they ought to be, and all these different things without even thinking about it, right?
Yep.
And
Yep.
so, anyway, I use the term religious as sort of a circumlocution to like distance myself from that question of what is philosophy and get to the ideas that the priest tasks throughout human history have been assigned to answer, though I think along with Nietzsche is the time for philosophy to answer them and to push out the pastor, right? So instead of going to church and asking the pastor what I should do, we should be courageous as philosophers and take the responsibility of answering those deeper questions in society.
Yeah, and as you were saying that, I was kind of thinking, well, I mean, religion in many ways was the original philosophy, or at least
Mm-hmm.
it is not necessarily the original philosophy, but society as it stands today was, or I guess philosophy as it stands today was built on the backbone of religion.
Yes. Yeah, and I really subscribe to the narrative or interpretation of the pre-Socratics that what really made philosophy blossom was we took all these the mythoi, all these different narratives, and then instead of just letting them contradict each other, we decided to be consistent. In other words, we applied non-contradiction. We began to reason, would hold two worldviews together and say, okay, God damn it, one of them has to be right. We can't just have Zeus, be a good guy and be an evil guy. We can't have the creation of the universe be one way and another simultaneously. And so I think, I guess from that narrative perspective, you could say that, philosophy wants to answer religious questions rationally, or at least consistently, right? And in a way that that doesn't betray a lack of integrity. Although on the other hand, you could just think of philosophy as edifying, like Kierkegaard, and say, well, with Tertullian, I believe because it's absurd. In that case, then that's a different story.
Yeah, because there's kind of two different modes of philosophy. One would be, say you're trying to, it's almost mathematical, and another is
Mm-hmm.
almost more like literary in a sense.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's a bad word for it, but because I know when I was
No, that's
reading
good.
your, I think it's not the value one. It was the
Mm-hmm.
there's one with the example of the beer bottle and you pull it out of the fridge,
Oh,
and
that's
then
right. Yeah.
yeah. So I was reading that. It was very like it was very mathematical. And did you take any math classes? Are you familiar with mathematics at all?
So to be honest, I think I suck at math, and the joke is that failed math majors go to analytic philosophy, and failed poets go into continental philosophy. And I actually almost believe that actually when I look at the backgrounds of these guys. But I never took math seriously as a profession. I only took it, as prerequisites for the classes and stuff like that, like I was pre med. So once upon a time, so that's stuff I took. But I did take mathematical logic with a member of, I was just a member, one of the people you previously had on your podcast, Bert Baumgartner.
Oh, really?
Brilliant. Yeah, absolutely. A brilliant guy and
Yeah.
such a clear and honest man. And he helped set me straight on mathematical logic. And so that's my education.
Oh, yeah. There we go.
I'm sorry, did I drop?
No, Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah,
For some reason, my there we
there
go.
he is.
Sorry
Let there
about
be
that.
light. There he
Yeah.
is. I sorry, I thought it was
uh,
a mainlander moment. I thought God committed suicide, and we were all just nothings. But there we go.
Feel it. Um, yeah, no, I was just gonna say that because when I did, I took a, I forgot what the class was, but it was like a mathematical logic. It was like logic
Mm.
one or something like that. Um, but yeah, it reminded me of what you were doing in that essay. I can't remember which one was the one with the where you're doing like the more analytic philosophy with like the logic and non-contradiction and everything. I can't remember which one it was.
Oh, you mean what kind of logic, or what kind of class?
Oh, it was a foray in ontology. That's what it was. Um,
Oh yeah, so I just used first order predicate logic, which is the lingua franca of analytic ontologists. Um, in a way, I try to describe it as my way of speaking the jargon of analytic philosophers to make a bridge between the continental and the analytic. So to kind of speak their own language and show that that what they're saying is true, but it's partial. That there is another aspect to reality which they presuppose or assume in order for things like first order logic to get off the ground. And that sort of comes back to your earlier comment about the literary versus the mathematical, because I think so I mean, this is kind of the way I would phrase it. Is sort of when Wittgenstein finishes Tractatus at the end, he says, where one cannot speak, where one must be silent. I would simply reply, well, actually, we should speak poetry. we should create films. We shouldn't shut up. We should be more creative
yeah,
with our ability to communicate those things.
yeah. No, I agree. I think a story can more profoundly influence your thought than any philosophical essay could or
Yes.
ever can. Mainly because I think we're very, I guess, story orientated creatures. We have memories. We think of we think of the future. We plan things. We have dreams. We're very story oriented. So a lot of
Yes.
people we gain, or everybody we gain messages and insights from stories. That's not
Mm-hmm.
to say that like philosophical logic isn't important, like reading Nietzsche or some kind of philosophical essay such as what you've written isn't important and won't give you insight. But a
Mm-hmm.
story is it's just as fundamentally important to read stories as it is to read those essays too.
Absolutely. And once we get to the essays, maybe this will be clear for people who are listening or
Yep.
watching. But the theory of value essay I wrote, in some sense, is trying to draw to the fact that things can only exist for us in a narrative way. So instead of almost saying the value of something, I was almost tempted to say that something can't be something, can't mean anything, in other words, without some sort of goal-oriented behavior. You can think of it poetically as being is found within the unity of the object and subject, which is a very Hegelian thought process. But yeah, so in other words, like I don't know what a hammer is, ontologically speaking, unless I have some sort of inherited precontextual, not precontextual, sorry, preconceptual context wherein which I know the sense of a hammer and use it without even thinking about it, right? You can think of it as sort of a pushback against the intellectualist assumption that Socrates had, right? When Plato thought to himself, well, hang on a second, we're talking about what piety is and trying to create a formal definition, right? Like which in formal logic you could say is the intention or definition of a predicate, which will help us pick out what an object is. But before we can even do that, we have to know what the hell we're talking about in some preconceptual way. Because if I didn't have a sense for what piety is, for instance, I can't go around telling you what is and isn't piety. I can just create something ex nihilo, and that would just be sufficient. But for some reason, that's not enough. Whereas Plato would, go on to subscribe to a sort of a two-world universalism, right, with its theory of forms, I would be more realistic and say, well, that's just culture. That's just the inherited context that that we rely on implicitly in order to know what things are at a preconceptual level. And philosophy is indebted to that, including logic, which we don't even acknowledge, I think.
Yeah, are you kind of alluding to the fact that like nothing exists in isolation? You can't know something in isolation unless there's context behind it. Like for
Mm-hmm.
instance, when you're doing logic, your logic doesn't make sense if you just have one symbol down. That one symbol doesn't make
Mm-hmm.
any sense unless there's other ones around it that are pointing to a
Mm-hmm.
conclusion.
Right. What you're alluding to is what Heidegger would call the ontological structure of the ready to hand. So, in other words, what makes an equipment ontologically present for you at all is the contextual whole within within which it exists. So, a hammer can't exist without nails, for instance, or without something to
Yep.
hammer,
Yep.
etc. The way I try to describe it is imagine you had a Coke bottle, right? Just wash up onto the shore of an island.
Yeah.
And let's say that no one there had a sense of what a Coke bottle has, no concept of it, right? From our God's eye perspective, or really, it's really narcissistic, but we think from our perspective, which is the true perspective, we might evaluate at the domain of the island that is there a Coke bottle there? Check, yes. But let's say, for instance, that that wasn't possible. And we asked the natives there, is there a Coke bottle on the island? They wouldn't understand what we're talking about, even though objectively there is a barrage of empirical sensations or observations that we might say help pick out that object according to our predicate. Without that background knowledge what a Coke bottle is, transcendentally speaking, at least, the Coke bottle can't exist for them. It's literal nonsense.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. So, well, that reminds me of something. I watched this video a long time ago. Are you familiar with Vsauce?
How can I not? Yeah, no, he's great.
So I was watching Vsauce 2. It's the other guy, and he was it was this video titled "What is Blue?" or like "Is the sky blue?"
Mm,
or something along those lines. And he was describing the history of the color blue. I don't know how much of this is true. I didn't fact check it, but he was describing the history of the color blue over the ages and how people didn't have a word for the color blue. And because they didn't have a word for the color blue, the sky was never described as blue. It was always described as like green or like a shade of green
mm-hmm,
until we had
mm-hmm.
textiles that were the color blue, like until we discovered like lapis lazuli or something like that.
Right,
When
right.
people could have those blue textiles and they could see that color blue, and then they'd see the sky was blue. And, oh, now they perceive that the sky is blue. They call it blue. So the color blue didn't exist until I guess there was context around that color for it
Mm-hmm,
to
mm-hmm.
exist.
Right, and I think it's always important to phenomenologically bracket the realist assumptions, right? That when we talk about blue, if there's some sort of empirical uh, observation that corresponds to what we call blue, that therefore there's blue there. Because, I think the transcendental flavor of my project is lost on a lot of people because they don't understand that I'm not making a realist argument. I'm saying, of course, that, like when we say that blue didn't exist, we're not saying that there isn't some sort of empirical
Blue.
phenomenon there
Yeah. Yeah.
that would call
Yeah. Like
blue,
people see
but it can't.
blue, right? But yeah.
Right, but blue can't exist for us
Yeah.
unless we already have some of that inherited concept or invent it, right?
Exactly.
And that's that's hard for people to wrap their brains around. But the way I like to think of it is, if we think of our identities, for instance, and the way we interpret ourselves and our existence, we don't know who we are without some sort of identity or role that assigns us a function that
Yeah.
allows us to interpret our choices, right? And we take that largely for granted at a preconceptual level. It's like a mom can't give you the necessary and sufficient conditional definition of a mom, but she is a mom and she interprets herself that way and makes choices based off
Yeah.
that, right? And we're not saying that she isn't a mom in the empirical sense, right? But that she can't understand that she's a mom unless it's revealed to her in her self-interpretation that she's a mom. I think lots of discourse today is sort of a talking past each other on this point, right? Because when people say, "Oh, blue didn't exist until we had the concept,"
Yeah.
people would say, "No, there isn't. Something out there, right?" But they're missing the point. Like it's
Yeah.
a transcendental claim that it wouldn't exist for us unless there was some concept there.
Yeah, like we don't
Essentially,
it exists, but we don't realize that it exists. Like for instance, when we go to the
exactly.
Coke
Yeah.
bottle, when we go to the
Hmm.
Coke bottle on the beach, sure, they can see the Coke bottle, but it's not necessarily distinguishable from all the other rocks and stuff that's on the beach.
Hmm. Hmm.
Right.
Yeah, the way the sort of comical video that you see on the internet is this video of a child who's pointing at a gaggle of ducks. Is that they're called, a gaggle of ducks? And she says, "Look at all those chickens." And we laugh, right? Because obviously we categorize them that way.
Yeah.
But that's because she's learning the cultural context that makes ducks exist as something distinct from chickens, right? And even though there's some sort of empirical experience there, it's not itself doesn't make the object, right? So this is kind of what Kant meant, right, when he said that we have an empirical barrage, but we can't recognize something unless there's some sort of concept, right? And most of those are a posteriori, right? We learn them. But Kant, of course, was interested in the idea, but what if there's some concepts that are necessary to recognize anything as an object, right? Which is a very interesting idea. Um, yeah, so that's kind of the basis of my thought there.
Yeah, because well, I mean, in my opinion, it's kind of like language as it is kind of this thing that differentiates things from each other. It separates things.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of
Mm-hmm.
makes I guess, to the one point, everything seemed, I guess, like when you're a child, everything seems like equal, basically. It's all just, it's all just
Yeah.
reality. But as you start to learn words, you start to differentiate between things, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
or like, for instance, when you read, I believe it was On Truth and Lie in Extra Moral Sense by Nietzsche. Are you familiar? Okay, sweet.
Sorry, this is the price of being out in nature. You
Yep.
cut out that again. Sorry. So I think we're going to refer to Nietzsche's essay on truth and the extra moral sense.
Yep.
Mm.
Yep. No, he gives an example of how like in language a lot of times we kind of lie in a sense. We make
Mm-hmm.
unequal things equal to each other. Like for instance, if we have a if you have a bunch of leaves, um, you could call one thing a leaf, but it's not really equal to any other leaf, right? All
Mm-hmm.
leaves are unique, yet we can categorize them all as leaves. And it's not
Right.
until you keep categorizing each different type of leaf from each different kind of tree that you can start to more differentiate them into unequal things, but there's still other things just like them that you have to categorize in the same group. So you're still
Mm-hmm.
setting an unequal thing as equal.
Absolutely. I mean, the way I try to conceptualize it is in Heideggerian terms. So you think
Okay.
of sort of a primordial phenomenon that we're all open on. So the child, both of us, we're both here in the world, seeing a phenomenon. But what can be an object for us or a thing in any sense depends on that historical context that allows us to interpret the thing as a thing in the first place. And this is sort of something that Heidegger, I think, stole from Kierkegaard and Nietzsche, respectively, is like this idea that our inherited context allows things to show up as things in the first place, allows us to do philosophy, right? Because I interpret myself as a philosopher according to the context that has informed my decisions and makes me who I am. So we can't escape it. But there's a sort of skepticism, right, and these three men as to whether or not those interpretations are fidelitous to appearances, right? So sometimes, the inherited context that we have can obscure the phenomenon or maybe deny it, right? So I think of the mystery of existence. I was actually talking about this with a eminent Heidegger scholar, Dr. Groth, who I take Dawes analysis courses with. A brilliant man. You should read his works. But he and I were sort of emailing each other on this issue, and we both agreed that, particularly for our generation, we're open on the mystery of being, that there's something there that needs to be communicated. But the context that we find ourselves within is not allowing us the words to express it. So there's sort of this deeper sense of the phenomenon that is being revealed to us, that we need to find a way or a means in language to express it. And so this is sort of fights back against sort of the, you could probably think of it as the kind of resignation that might come from the view that we can only know that something exists due to context. Like, no, we're open on our world, and there might be phenomenon there that our language or context can't explain. And so we
Yep.
need a new way of looking at it, right? And you can think of doing philosophy as something like that, as discovering something that's been there all along and learning to communicate it so now it's there for everyone else, sort of bringing honey back
Yep.
to the, or pollen, you could think of back to the hive, as Nietzsche would say.
No, I really like that idea where you see something that's unexplainable, incommunicable, and you try to bring that, and that thing doesn't exist for everyone else because they haven't had that thought. They
Mm-hmm.
haven't had the capacity to even imagine it because they don't have the words to describe it. And as a
Mm-hmm.
philosopher, you're bringing that into their reality. Yeah, no, I
Right.
really love
And
that
I
idea.
Absolutely. And I think right here would be really good to qualify what I just said a little bit, because
Yep.
there's certainly people that can take an elitist interpretation of that. So,
Yeah.
or maybe fascistic in a way,
Yep.
because Heidegger, no, because you could say, oh, I am the only one that communicates with being, or I'm the one that's open on something that you can't
Yep.
understand. So you have to
Yep.
listen to me. It's like, no, 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 no. Like I would say, I would qualify that immediately and say
Yep.
that what we're trying to communicate is open there for everyone to see. It just
Yep.
takes, somebody who is willing to attempt to communicate that, to bring it to the culture for us to see. So maybe
Yep.
that bottle
Exactly.
washes it.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. So maybe that bottle washes up on the shore and someone categorizes it as a fruit or something and then dismisses it, right? And so everyone's a fruit. Everyone shut up. It's fine. And some child might like cling it, and could see through it and say, this is clearly not fruit. I don't know what the hell you're talking about. We don't have a word for it, but obviously, we need to create some new categories here. And so that's sort of the, sort of the, I mean, if there's
Yep.
any elitist element, maybe it's that. It's sort of this pushback against the context that wants to dismiss things as though they've already been understood. You can think of it how I think the Heidegger used the term das Gerede, the chatter, or the
Mm.
day-to-day way we commonly talk about things that covers up their uniqueness. So, for instance, let's
Mm.
say you're live in a conservative neighborhood and there is a gay couple next door or something like that,
Mm.
and their way of understanding homosexuality might be in such a way that they dismissed it already. They already know who they are. They don't need to talk to them,
Mm.
right? They're
Yep.
just a person. But instead of engaging with them, maybe sitting down for lunch and talking to them as a neighbor and really hearing them out as a human being, and maybe they'll get a different context and reveal something there that they haven't seen before. But you see but dismissing it and categorizing it and pushing it away prevents that it conceals that. It doesn't
Yep.
make it something subject to scrutiny, for sure.
Yeah, no, I think the way that you're kind of expressing it is that, say, a philosopher does the same thing that an inventor does or a scientist does, but with
Mm.
language. And I guess your field is sort of the mind rather than the physical. It's hard for me to say what your field is, I guess.
Oh, wait. So
But
I want to push back against that immediately, because you think of the physical and the mind, right? Those are
yep,
ontological categories.
yep,
Um, and so the kind of the way you think, right way to think about it, I suppose, is to say, first there has to be a unitary phenomenon that's interpreted before we
mm,
divide it between subject and object, right? So this
yep,
is sort of how Heidegger talks about it. He says, we especially since the Enlightenment, right? Especially since Descartes, we've gotten to this habit of thinking of the world as divided between subject and object. This is how you
yep,
make money as a cognitive scientist or as a philosopher of mind, quote unquote, making up all these hack and eye theories about how it's possible that consciousness can interact with the body, whatnot. But
yep,
Heidegger says, well, this is kind of a backwards way to look at it, because if you bracketed or suspended judgment for just a moment, that all these different assumptions about reality and yourself, you'd
mm,
realize that there's just one phenomenon. There's just
yep,
one unitary thing that we're then post hoc interpreting as something divided. And so, in some sense, there is no
mm,
division there
yep,
already. The division is sort of a pseudo problem that emerges from our interpretation of what's already there, present before us. Now, I'm not so Heideggerian as to say that the mind body problem doesn't exist. I think it does, to the chagrin
yep,
of many Heideggerians. But I would say, though, that we do have to acknowledge, though, that even if that problem does exist, that problem can only exist because there's a fundamental phenomenon there first that we're interpreting as a problem. And if we didn't see that as the body and mind, for instance, as united in some fundamental way before that problem emerged, then it couldn't occur to us at all.
Yeah, exactly. And hey, you just gave me the words to describe what I was thinking about.
Oh. I'll never forget it. So, like I said, Nietzsche inspired me to double major in psychology, and I'll never forget. I think a professor in one of my psychology courses says something to that effect. She said, people who do well in philosophy are really good between communicating between the left brain and right brain. In some sense, trying to take non-propositional symbolic thought and then trying to communicate it in language. And I thought that was actually really interesting. And I think she was really onto something when she said that. Yeah. Although I'll qualify that because, we wouldn't call Carl Jung a philosopher per se, because he didn't try to communicate in language as much as he tried to address with the symbols themselves that emerge within our unconscious, right, and try to interpret them.
Yeah.
So maybe that's what makes a philosopher is going back maybe to the point we made about the pre-Socratics, trying to make it consistent and something that can be expressed in some form. It doesn't have to be linguistic, but at least in a form that has consistency.
Yeah, it would be tough for me to call Nietzsche a philosopher in that realm, but it in many ways he was really he was kind of more like Jung in the way that he expresses ideas. Although we'll save that for another day. I want to go into your my theory of value.
Absolutely.
And it was a phenomenal essay, and I loved.
Thank you.
First and foremost, I loved how you kind of at the beginning you kind of break out the values in which you're writing your essay from. And I'll just read them off. It's 1, anti-realism, 2, non-cognitivism, 3, sentimentalism, 4, error theory, and 5, Thrasymachionism. Is that correct?
It's really hard to pronounce. As you saw, I put the pronunciation in parentheses next to the term. The way I would say is Thrasymachionism or something like that.
Okay.
But I only say it that way because I actually took ancient Greek, so I know how it's supposed to be pronounced. Like I say, Socrates and Socratos. Yeah.
Here, and actually, do you mind if people see the essay if I share my screen?
Not at all. Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay.
Although all you pilferers out there, they'll be watching the academic journals. Better not steal anything.
Let's just, if you wouldn't mind, could we go through each of these terms and kind of describe what you meant by each of them before we kind of go into what your essay was about?
Absolutely. So starting off the first one, anti-realism, that's just pushing against what we'd call type 1 objectivity. So the way we describe it in metaphysics is that a type 1 objectivity is, imagine everyone just was brain dead immediately. And I mean, literally everyone, like in the universe, there's no minds whatsoever. Yeah. If that were the case, whatever's left over in existence after that fact, objectively, it has a type 1 objectivity. So it doesn't rely on minds whatsoever. Then there's a type 2 objectivity, which is basically that something we do concede that it exists, that's an object of some kind, but it's not something that would exist independently of minds. So a good example of this would be money, right? Or capital. Yeah. Bert, had this sort of thing where he said something like the physicalists want to say the economist isn't doing anything real because money isn't physical, and then Bert just kind of slams the desk and it's like well, money is real, gosh darn it, if you stop getting paid for your philosophy position, it'd become really real for you. And his sort of point there is that it has a type 2 objectivity. Identity is another thing, is a type 2 objectivity, right? Like a mom doesn't cease to be a mom just because certain objective conditions no longer make it possible. It's still something that depends on her context that allows her to take up possibilities in her world that allows her to fit into the identity. Although identity, I suppose, is more complicated because there are maybe type 1 objectivity elements within that. But that's sort of the gist of it. So when I say that values, with respect to values, I'm an anti-realist, I'm simply saying that they exist but they don't have a type 1 existence. They don't enjoy an existence that is independent of minds. You can think of Nietzsche, roughly speaking, as making that argument in the Genealogy of Morals, right? The whole essay is basically like a surgery on your mind to try to get you out of the view that values is something that's independent and objective, right? He's trying to show you by lieu of showing you the historical contingency of our concepts of good and evil, right, that we take for granted.
Yep.
So that's a good example, I suppose. So I could probably end that there.
Sweet. And then non-cognitivism. Cognitivism.
Right. So when I say things like beer is good, right?
Yeah.
I'm not saying, which is a relative statement. I'm not saying things like I'm not really saying that beer is good in a type 1 objective way. I'm saying something like beer is tasty to me, or beer releases dopamine, or beer allows me to socialize with friends, and I like that, or something to that effect.
Yep.
A better way to think of it is a sort of a disguised emotive statement, right? So kind of like when someone says something like, it's bad to cut in traffic. What I'm really telling you is I don't want you to cut in traffic.
Yeah.
Instead of just coming out and saying that, I'm using those other terms to get that across. So maybe the best way to think of it is sort of that I'm an emotivist with respect to moral propositions.
Yeah, just a follow-up question on that. So let's say we're taught that something is bad, right? Let's say we're taught that cutting you off is bad. We're taught that. But also someone cuts you off for the first time after being predisposed to the idea that it's bad to get cut off, and you get angry that they cut you off. But can that be then also for multiple reasons? Hey, I feel bad, like I don't feel good about this because I was taught that I shouldn't feel good about it, and because it made me feel unsafe when they came in front of me.
Yeah, so it's not just one thing. Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's a barrage of different things. And when I say non-cognitivist, maybe a better way of saying it is non-propositional. So it's sort of like you can think of morals as arising as post hoc rationalizations of what I'm feeling. And I really don't like the analogy of the elephant and the blind man, so the blind man on top of the elephant trying to tell it where to go, because it's sort of, I don't know, it's been overused, but that's another way of saying it. It's sort of saying that, the man on top is not in charge. Ultimately, it's really the pre or subcortical functions that we are behest to, whether or not we realize it. I mean, a good example today is, I felt very pessimistic and down in life, and then I realized I didn't get enough sleep. I took a nap and then got up and said, "Wow, life is great again." And those value judgments, right? It's like life is good, life is bad. We're just an interpretation of my precognitive, affects.
Yep, exactly. Or I almost wonder, in the context, like there's been days where I've felt very depressed, and I didn't like really want to live that much, and then it'd be wintertime, right? And I'd go out and I'd drive in my car, and I'd like slide in my car real quick, and I'd get really freaked out, and all of a sudden I'd be like, I want to live, I don't want to die, I don't want to die.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
So I don't know, in like that kind of context, it's like life is good, life is bad can kind of change based on, say, in one instance you're bored and you feel like life is meaningless, and then another state life feels good because you're about to die, right? And you're struck with this fear, like death is bad. Yeah, death is bad, meaning life is good.
Absolutely. I mean, another way to think about it too is think of Nietzsche's comments at the beginning of the Twilight of the Idols, right? Where he says things like, I mean, summarizing here, but he would say things like, I don't know if life is good or bad, right? Unlike Schopenhauer, I'm not going to say it's good or bad. I'm just simply going to say that regardless of whether or not it's good or bad, there are certain conditions within which man affirms or denies life. So we can scientifically look at those conditions and then maybe create a philosophy of life that affirms those conditions, or affirms, but makes present those conditions in which man affirms life as opposed to negates it, right? And I think that's a really profound way of looking at that problem. Although I would say contra Nietzsche, because Nietzsche is funny, right? Because he's an existentialist on one hand, but he's very positivistic on another hand. And so that's very positivistic of him, right, to assume those things. I would say with Kierkegaard on the other hand, though, that there's certain facts of existence, right, that make us sick unto death. And so no matter how much you want to change the conditions of life to affirm it, we're stuck with them, such as the fact we're all going to die. Like no amount of health is going to change that. It might change how you interpret, of course, but dealing with that self-consciousness, though, is a totally different animal, I would say. So just with that qualification.
Yeah, I wanted to say that even if we could find some kind of immortality, you as a person changes over time. So the old you dies in every moment. I always like to say that because, people can come back with, hey, well, I mean, what if we, with like quantum mechanics and like quantum computing and AI, we invent some way to become immortal. I'm like, well, I mean, you're still going to be constantly changing in life, right?
All my choices would be meaningless. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, I play life in hard mode. No, I'd rather die, because every time I choose to spend a moment with someone, it's meaningful, right?
Yep, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
So let's move on to sentimentalism. I know that kind of bleeds in from non-cognitivism, but
yeah, it bleeds in very very well. So you can think of sentimentalism is sort of the idea that we adopt moral judgments, or make moral judgments in response to affective stimuli. And I think I think if you want to scroll down, maybe so everyone can see, I think in that section I make the example of somebody who might be biologically predisposed to be homosexual, because I think the literature suggests that we're born with our sexuality for the most part. But let's say they happen to be born in a West Texas conservative town that prays the gay away. In that case, they're in a very unfortunate situation, right? Because they're born with certain facts that they didn't ask for, that make them predisposed to do things that are immoral, at least according to the regime under which they find themselves, right? And so, anyway, in that case, though, we're seeing them respond to their own affects towards something, right? So think of like, you want to eat the Oreos in the middle of the night. You say, oh, I shouldn't, because that's a bad thing to do, right? And when you say that's a bad thing to do, you're really just responding to your own stimulus. You're responding to the way you already feel about something. And that really blends well with the non-cognitivism, right? Because we're saying that it's not a propositional structure that we're responding to. We're responding to an affect of sorts.
Yeah, no, it's like because there is kind of this like, I don't want to say cognitive dissonance, but or like I guess I want to say contradiction. Like if we're born in a world where we're our minds, like because of our own physiology, we're predisposed to certain tendencies, yet the world around us, I guess, negates those tendencies or represses them down, tells you shouldn't do those things, then you are kind of at this point where you don't really know how to value, like what do you value then, right?
Right. Well, I mean, might as well be nihilistic, because reality has rejected you at that point. I mean, I wouldn't see any difference between that and hell, essentially.
Yep. And I mean, obviously there are like so like obviously with like the point of homosexuality, that's like perfectly just and moral. And I mean, I don't like to say the word moral, but like it's, at least to me, I think it's a perfectly fine thing, right? And
Yeah, absolutely.
and millions of other people agree. However, let's say you're someone who is predisposed to, I guess, psychopathy. Like you're predisposed to being someone who wants to torture animals and kill them, and society agrees. I guess in that sense, it's kind of like it's a like where do you go from there? Is like as far as values, as far as like a set like
Right. Well, I'm a realist in this respect, so
yeah,
I wouldn't say. So again, keeping with my commitment to type 2 objectivity, I wouldn't say objectively in the type 1 sense that
yep,
what they're
yep,
doing would be bad.
yep.
I would simply
Agreed,
sympathize with the
agreed.
fact, but I would simply sympathize with the fact that you can't function in a society where all of us are predisposed not to kill each other and to function well, to sustain a member of society that does that.
Yep,
So we try to rehabilitate them, or the moral trick that priests use and pastors use, if they're all across the world, is just to tell you that you're a bad person and to get
yep,
you to negate yourself for yourself, so I don't have to do anything for you. Why should I have to do anything like put you in jail or punish you when all I have to do is make you convinced that you're an evil person, at least from our perspective, right? And so
yep,
that's true. Like
exactly.
from our perspective, what you're doing is evil. But in order to get you to comply, I have to convince you it's a type 1 objectivity. So
Yep,
it's not just me saying
exactly.
that. It's not us, but it's you, it's God that's saying that, right? And so
Yep,
then it sort of diverts the or not diverts, it shifts the burden of proof, right?
yep,
Unreasonably, right? Because whether or not the priest even knows it, they're doing it for their own sakes, for the sake of
mhm,
the community,
yep,
right?
yep,
And which is not bad in and of itself, right? So I want to resist that sort of elitist tendency too, to negate that. I think it's very reasonable. I would say, like if I was a member of society, I
mm,
would love it not to be afraid of someone who's going to kill my children. I
yep.
would love to convince them that what they're doing is bad.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to give that example because you gave something that most people consider good, but some people consider bad. So I wanted
That
to
was
give an example
intentional.
of,
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So I wanted to give an example of something that most people think is bad,
Mhm.
and like that one person might think it's good, right? Um,
Right.
all right. So error theory. What is error
Mhm.
theory?
I love error theory. So this is my understanding of error theory. Error theory is the idea that if you have a fundamental misconception within your domain of investigation, any of the propositions that you use with those conceptions are going to be automatically false. So in the paper there, you can see I use the example of flat Earth theory, right?
Yep,
So what we mean by Earth within the context of flat Earth theory is a flat Earth. We mean nothing else
yep,
by it. We don't mean a round Earth. We don't mean square Earth. We mean a flat Earth. So therefore, when I make propositions like, "Oh, the Earth is going around the sun," which is the case in some flat Earth theories, that's a false statement, because in fact there is no flat Earth going around the sun, because that's what I mean by Earth, right? And
yep,
so you think of when people say that is good or that is bad, they're not doing it with the self consciousness that they are uh, uh, creating post hoc rationalizations. They're saying in almost a platonic sense that in a type 1 objective way, what you're doing is condemned by God, for instance.
yep.
And that is a fundamentally incorrect way of viewing the world if the theory that I hold about values holds, right? It's
Okay.
simply mistaken, right? So so I think that really helps, I think, ground lots of discourse, right? So when someone says, that's bad, we know what they really mean by it, whether or not they know it, but at least
Mm.
propositionally within the context of this theory of what values are, what they're saying is entirely mistaken. That's not good at all, because what you mean by good doesn't exist. There's simply no type 1 objective good out there that you mean by it.
Okay, so with area theory, it's kind of like if you make a statement, but the fundamental belief that led you to that statement is false, then the proposition of that statement is also false. Is that where you're kind of?
Yeah, kind of. Yeah. So I hope I'm not strawmanning error theory here, because I'm
Yep,
not an error theorist myself. But
yep,
my current understanding of it is something along those lines, that you have a misconception of something, and therefore whatever propositions you can make with that conception is a category error. Like, so it
yep,
doesn't matter if it's logically sound. Astrology is logically sound. It's internally consistent, but its
yep,
propositions are false. The best
yep.
way I heard Professor put it is that astrology is a false science. It's logically consistent, but it's simply not the case.
Hey, it's
That
fun though.
same thing with fire theory. Oh, absolutely. I mean, why? What better to like get together with like buddies and bitch about the round earth? Like, oh, those guys are bad, for a few hours. I'm kind of tempted to do it just for fun, see what happens. But whatever.
Um, so just to clarify to the audience, you're an error theorist, but only in regard to values.
That's correct. Yeah,
Okay.
with respect to popular discourse surrounding values.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't be an error
Yeah.
theorist in this context because we want to be clear about equivocating two senses of good here, right? Because we both know, at least within the context of this theory, that what we mean by good is something else besides what
Yeah.
maybe a Christian thinks by the term good.
Okay. So I'm not even going to try to say it again. All right.
if you could scroll down, I'll try to read out what I gave. Who knows? Maybe it was
Yep.
an incorrect pronunciation. So I think
I
you
know
might
it
have
was
passed it.
down. Oh, there it
No,
is.
you didn't pass
It's
it.
right
I'm
here.
sorry.
It's right here.
Yeah, yeah. Thresmakian. Yeah. So that's the
Razumakian.
how you say it.
Okay.
Thresmakian. Yep. So so that's a so this position refers to a character, a notorious character from the Platonic dialogues named
Mhm.
Thrasymachus, who is sort of the guy who gets the butt of the joke in Plato's head, so to speak, because it represents everything opposed to the moral theory that Plato is trying to establish, which is a type one objective theory of values, right? Thrasymachus holds that really politicians, pastors, parents use terms like good and evil just as a means to get what they want, right?
Mhm.
And I would say it doesn't even have to be conscious. It just has to be like, if I tell you that's bad and that gets you to do the thing that I want you to, it's like such a ceasing and desisting behavior, then I'll
Yep.
use those terms just as in a pragmatic manner, right?
Yep.
I
That's
think
how
I
we
think
train
this sort of
dogs, right?
that's right. Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
And we gaslight them. That's right. So, no. So in any case, I mean, that's sort of I meant that kind of a humorous way, but
Yep.
according to my theory, that's kind of what we do with humans too. It's like we're kind of
Mhm.
gaslighting them to thinking that
Yep.
what we're talking about is good and evil, but really, I'm talking about what I want out of you, right?
Yep.
In this sort of context, right? And so anyway, this last bit of my position is simply trying to describe the fact that we use language, moral language all the time. And so, obviously, if it was an error theoretical position, I'm sorry, if that error theoretical position is true, then it begs the question, why the hell do we do it? And it's like, well, because it works. It's because when Trump gets up there,
Yep.
right, and makes moral statements, and I really laud Trump for this, not as a Trumpster, but just like in the sense that that guy gets in the makeup room every morning and puts on the makeup before he goes on stage, and then says exactly what he needs to in order to get people to vote for him. And that's sort of the Simikian mindset. Although I
Yep.
think in Trump's case, it's done knowingly, right, to good or ill ends, but who knows? But to his own ends for sure. And so,
Yep.
uh, so anyway, I'm probably talking circles, but at that point, yeah, it's like we do this all the time without even knowing it.
Yep.
Sometimes I catch myself doing it too. Like someone might be doing something inappropriate and say, like you shouldn't do that. I use some sort of ought statement.
Yep.
I think to myself for a moment, wait a minute. No, I mean, I want them to stop it because it's hurting my ears.
Yep.
Like there's no imperative there. Like I just told them to do it and they've been conditioned to obey that. So that's fine. So in that
Yep.
sense, maybe if I'm being charitable, not to stick on this too long, but I would say to be charitable, one could argue that there's nothing wrong with this per se, unless it gets in the way of the flourishing of a type, which is what kind of get into later.
Yep.
Because we can pretend that we need to subscribe to some sort of illusion of a type one objective morality in order
Yep.
to pragmatically cooperate, but that's only problematic, of course, when that type illusion of type 1 objectivity can get in the way of a flourishing life, for instance, right? So
Yep.
again, a good case would be the gentleman with homosexual tendencies. It's like, well, he can't live a fulfilling life anymore because he thinks he's evil. That's which is sad.
Yep. Perfect. Well, okay, so we went through those five, and then I wrote down a few questions that I had on this
Mhm.
essay. Um, so I want to say first that you kind of claim that humans are not objects.
Hmm.
Do you as a person, sorry, by claiming that humans are not objects, is this a value judgment? And also, first and foremost, what do you mean by humans are not objects?
So it's kind of funny. If you're referring to the end of the essay as sort of a phenomenological epilogue, and I
Yep.
felt kind of bad putting that in there because I really didn't justify those claims. So
Yep.
maybe this will help. So I currently, so again, I'm very Hegelian. I'm not saying this is true, but
Hmm.
currently in my stage of development, uh, Heidegger in his existential analytic, I think, really revealed certain structures that we refer to when we talk about the human being. So you can think of it in terms of like, I have certain ontical facts, such as, I'm in the woods right now. I, have health conditions. I am married. I have a job, and these kinds of things, right? But it's sort of in the Buddhist sense. You can look around at all these particular objects, but you don't see the I that we refer to ontologically when I refer to the subject, right?
Yep.
So the Buddhists and Hume, for instance, following in lieu of them independently, would say, well, there is no such thing as a self then. The self doesn't exist, right? Heidegger would push back against that and say, no, it does exist, but not in that way. It has an ontologically distinct flavor than all the empirical things that you identify with yourself, right? And so, I think of the way Wittgenstein put it is that, the true I, in some sense, metaphysical subject, is a subject that is open on the world, but is not a part of it, right? It's the limit of the world in some sense. And so Heidegger phenomenologically wanted to give out what you might call the existential structures of the human being. So certain universal structures of the types of beings that we are, such as the fact that we're all going to die.
Yep.
Not in the sense that we decay, right? Our hearts stop working, but that the possibilities of life end immediately. Like I've actually heard this
Yep.
from someone who worked in hospice. They said the thing that people always say in hospice is the thing that sucks about dying isn't the dying, but the fact that all these possibilities of life are cut off immediately. That the
Yep.
only possibility that all human beings have is the impossibility for the possibility. And that's in fact how Heidegger would describe it. So things like that, he would say constitute what it means to be human, right? And and what's important about that is that it's a pre-evaluative judgment because it's only based off of an interpretation of Dasein, which in German roughly translates to being here or being there, that we begin to form ethical uh, systems or systems of how we ought to choose possibilities in life, right? So, in other words, we all share certain existential structures that allow us to make choices in life and fulfill possibilities. But how we choose to interpret our lives then gives way to the ethical, right? And I think this is a really brilliant. There's a really brilliant objection to Heidegger is that Heidegger sort of gives a pre-moral analysis of what it means to be human, right? So the authentic human being for Heidegger, for instance, is pre-moral. So you could be you could be an authentic Nazi as well as an authentic Jew, for instance.
Yep.
But and so that's very highly problematic, right? Obviously,
Yep.
but I think to your question though, I think it responds very straightforwardly. It's that we're just making statements about certain facts of about what it means to be human in a way that does not include the typical notions of facts surrounding our hair color or our particular conditions in life. It's sort of like what
Yep.
humans are everywhere at all times and places. But again, it's pre-moral and pre-evaluative, so it's not a value claim
Yep.
as far as I can tell.
Let's uh let's circle back a little bit, and could you kind of describe what your theory of value is and how you kind of came to that conclusion?
Oh, well, actually, now that we discussed Dasein, this would be a great opportunity to
Yep.
reflect on that. So,
Yep.
um, so I think the technical definition I give, and you have it in front of you, so if you want to, you could correct me on this. But I think it
Yep.
said something like the value of an object is determined with respect to its perceived relevance for behavior at a given time, or something like that. And what I mean by that, especially when we think of the existential structures that guide our lives, You can think of it as whatever I determine as the purpose of my life at this current moment interprets what's good and bad for me, in this
Yeah.
sort of evaluative sense, right? So, for instance, say you're driving on the highway
Yeah.
and, someone cuts you off, right? Like we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
That's fine. I evaluate that somewhat neutrally. In fact, I could be in such a daze going home from work.
Yeah.
I'm such in a, live and let live attitude. It doesn't even cross my mind
Yeah.
consciously that there's someone there that cut in front of me.
Mhm.
But let's say suddenly I need to get to work next morning and that same bastard cuts me off.
Yeah.
And suddenly the meaning of that person objectively changes almost instantaneously.
Yeah.
But it's only with respect to who I think I am that moment, guiding my actions towards a goal, that makes that possible, right? And the large part of the essay that we haven't gotten to yet, where I try to defend my position, talks a lot about responses to non-consequentialist conceptions of value, right? Which basically says, regardless of the consequences, some things are just right or wrong, god damn it, right? But then my response is simply, well, can you even make sense of those categories without presupposing some sort of goal-oriented behavior, right? Because if you
Yeah.
think of non-consequentialist position, the easiest example being Christianity, they'd say, oh, you should do what God says, or you burn forever in hell. It's like, well, quite clearly, they're actually consequentialists, because they're saying, unless you do this, something bad's going to happen to you.
Yep.
And we all are sort of unconsciously motivated not to be tortured forever. So I'd say,
Yep.
that sort of kind of hijacks us a little bit. But
Yep. Or
I'm sorry,
even
does that answer your question? Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I was just gonna say, even if you take that non-literally, like you're gonna go to hell if you do this, i.e., you're
Yes.
going to be
Yeah.
in a bad state in life if you do this,
Mm-hmm.
or you're
Mm-hmm.
going to be in a good state in life if you do this, right? You're going to go to heaven, quote unquote.
Sure. Yeah.
Even in that sense, you're also still doing the same thing, right? If you do this, this will happen.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah, so it gives the lie, so to speak, I would say. If you really analyze any non-consequentialist theory of ethics hard enough, you would see ultimately it's a consequentialist view, if my view holds, right? So I'd be
Yep.
very surprised, if I found some sort of non-consequentialist view that held water in that regard. Kant's comes
Mhm.
pretty close, but not quite.
Yeah. So more or less, things have value, I guess, because you give them value, because the individual gives them value. So is your theory kind of more on an individualist perspective rather than a collectivist perspective? Say values
You know,
come from
mm,
the individual based on their feelings and emotions at that given time, and the
mhm.
goals that they're trying to achieve in that given time.
I would almost be tempted to say yes, except I think that would be too simplistic. I think
Yeah,
that,
I agree.
for
I agree.
instance, for instance, my identity is not
Mhm.
up to me.
Yep.
My identity has been given to me by my culture,
Yep.
and by the collective, right?
Hmm.
So in other words, I couldn't have value if it wasn't for the fact that I
Yep.
identify as somebody with a certain goal in life,
Yeah,
right?
and part of your
Uh,
identity is being a part of other groups, right?
that's right. Yeah, yeah.
Like you,
Whether or not I know it, yeah.
yep, yep. Like let's just say you're an atheist, right? And atheists
Mm-hmm,
have
mm-hmm.
a certain value or certain belief systems, and they might think that something is bad for a certain reason because they're an atheist, so atheists should think along that framework, right? And
True. Yeah.
obviously, most atheists don't have like a shared value structure, since the only belief there is that there is no God. But I'm just using that as an example. Um, you can identify with that group, and you as an individual will think certain things are bad from an individual perspective because you identify with the group as part of your individuality.
Yeah, absolutely. And it doesn't even have to be objectively the case. Sometimes we
Yep.
identify with groups that don't even exist. And yet that determines our
Yep.
choices in life and our possibilities.
Yep.
I even
Exactly.
go so far as, so I would even go so far back to an atheist analogy and do a Nietzschean, sort of spin on that and say, well, as a matter of fact, they are basing their whole identity off of this sort of interpretation of the will to truth, right?
Yep.
You could totally negate the will to truth, and some people do. Like I've seen plenty of people,
Mhm.
who are psychologically incapable of living in a world without some sort of belief in type 1 objectivity. Sort of say, you know what, sorry, incapable of living in a world without type 1 objectivity, excuse me. and
Yep.
say like, well, I have to believe in God. Like I have to in order to cope with
Yep.
reality. And they're self-aware of that. Right. But at the end of the day, though, you can't get out of this idea that you just Deus ex machina your values. And I think,
Yep.
on that point, it would be good to kind of come back to Jung and Nietzsche, because I think there's this terrible misconception of Nietzsche. And I wonder if you agree with this, that he says that we sort of do that with values. Like when he says we need to discover our own values, we somehow, sit in a lonely corner and think to ourselves, okay, what do I really want to be? And then we get out of there and suddenly we just live by those. It's like, no, we discover them. In fact, Nietzsche
Yep.
and stuff would say things like, you don't know who you are until you've encountered the world and seen those aspects of you emerge, right? And
Yeah.
that's part of
Yep.
self-discovery. Like you discover your values, you don't just invent them. And in some sense, they're already there, implanted to you by culture. Ralph Waldo Emerson had this great quote. He said, I don't remember the books I read just as little as I remember the food I eat every day,
Yep.
and yet they make me what I am.
Yep.
that's
Exactly.
sort of that's sort of
Exactly.
how we operate. Yeah.
Yeah. From there, I kind of wanted to bring up Nietzsche's saying, that he wants to philosophize with a hammer, right? And by
Mm-hmm.
that he means he like a sculptor, like using a
Like a
sculptor
like
and
a
a
tuning
chisel
fork,
to,
basically.
yep,
Yeah,
yep,
yeah.
like a tuning fork, right? Not like, not like bashing stuff up and breaking stuff, but
Right.
carefully sculpting something like the Statue of David, for instance, right?
Mm-hmm.
We discover our values by carefully sculpting them throughout life, by making mistakes, and each one of our
Mm-hmm.
decisions that lead to the next, right? Um,
Right.
and I mean,
Absolutely.
obviously, we're given certain materials, i.e., our body, our physiology, our
Mm-hmm.
own genealogical tendencies to
Mm-hmm.
deal with
Mm-hmm.
and to work with, but that doesn't
Absolutely. Yeah.
necessarily define what the statue is going to look like.
Right. And in fact, what you just touched on there is really funny. That's what Heidegger would call Geworfenheit, or thrownness.
Dwarfenheit.
So we're thrown. Yeah, exactly. No, I love this term. So it basically means we're thrown to the world, right? So
Yep.
imagine like everyone just wakes up one day, we're all on a stage, right? And we're just here, like we don't know what the hell we're doing. But suddenly someone comes along who's had parents who lived here longer than us and say,
Yep.
you're a book keeper now. So okay, and they give me a book and I start doing things, right? Give us things to do with our life, and say like, I'm not smart enough to be a bookkeeper, so I have to be someone else. This is sort of the throne sense of being in the world. And it's an
Yep.
existential, he would say, of all human beings. Like we're all thrown in the
Yep.
world. It's just that some of us are more aware of our thrownness than others, right? So if I'm a very well-off person in Western civilization, like a rich white guy, I'm going to be less aware of my thrownness and the strangeness of my condition than if I was someone who's condemned by society, right? Who's
Mhm.
suddenly more cognizant of the fact of, oh my
Yep.
gosh, I have, like going back to the psychopath example, all these predispositions to be somebody that everyone hates, right?
Yep.
And that's weird. Like I didn't ask for this, but I have to deal with it, and it restricts and opens possibilities for my life, right? They're more aware of
Yep.
that than say someone who takes it for granted, for sure.
Have you read The Stranger?
Oh, absolutely. L'étranger. Absolutely. It's beautiful.
Yeah, no, I mean that's kind of how I thought of Rousseau in The Stranger, when he gets into the situation, right, where he gets imprisoned for killing someone. And that's
Mm-hmm.
kind of when you start to see his philosophical growth. Like a lot of people,
Mm-hmm.
like they'll tell me that he's a static character, that he doesn't change at all. But I argue that there's actually a clear path from the beginning of the book to the end where he clearly changes and grows and continues to, like, I guess, increases his philosophy in life, his own introspection into his very life from being thrown into
Mm-hmm.
jail. And that's kind of what that reminded me of. When someone is condemned by society, that kind of awakens them to certain things.
Yes, absolutely. I would say it forces them to reinterpret their situation.
Yep,
It
exactly.
forces them to reinterpret. Well, I mean, I'll give you a very salient example. I was talking to someone who works
Yeah.
in resettlement work, and I had the privilege of discussing with him about his work, and the fact he read Camus and Heidegger in his spare time also helped sort of fuel the conversation. And the way he put it was sort of that, in the Kierkegaardian sense, that we're all living in despair, but we don't know it
Mhm.
because our
Yep.
identities are contingent, right? Like we don't even think about it, but my possibility of being a philosopher right now could just be stripped away from me if I went back to my bank account and realized I had no money. Like I can't
Yep.
go to school anymore. Oh no, what am I going to do? Like that kind of thing. So I
Yep.
gave the example of a mother who came from a second world country, and really identified as being a mother, like just absolutely
Yep.
cherished her child, and already she's been thrown into the world into this new context, away from her homeland. She doesn't even know English. She's struggling,
Yep.
but she's still keeping it positive because she's got some reason to exist. And then her child fell out of the two-story window and died, and this sort of moment changed her identity forever. Now she's no longer a mom,
Yep.
right?
Mhm.
So, and then she just ended up in this sort of apathetic state where she couldn't do anything anymore. She was now
Yep.
aware of her despair. And I remember he said this to me. He said, I look at that, and what makes me truly terrified is that I'm her and I just don't know it yet. That all it takes
Yep.
is one bad day for the contingency of my identity to be revealed to me, and then suddenly, what Heidegger would say, the nothingness makes itself known. And this is sort of what I think Sartre means by nothingness, and being in nothingness. This sort of Heideggerian notion that behind our identities and our sense of our
Yep.
world being permanent is this looming fact that nothing guarantees anything
Yep.
for me. That
Have you
any
seen The
moment my
Killing
world could fall
Joke?
apart. Yeah, I don't think I have. Uh, so no, please go on. What about the Killing Joke?
Yeah. So, The Killing Joke is an animated Batman movie. And the whole premise of the movie, it's like R-rated. It's like an adult
Mm-hmm.
animation. There's like lots of blood and stuff. It's like the most it's like the most mature Batman movie I've ever seen.
Mm-hmm.
And the premise of the movie is that the Joker is trying to prove to Batman that all it takes is one bad day to turn
Mm-hmm.
you into an insane lunatic psychopath like he is, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And when you said that, like all it takes is one bad day, that's what brought my mind to it. But I guess like
Right.
um, I don't know how that has to do with the value theory, but it is kind of interesting how something can happen on one day that kind of takes everything from your life away from you and radically changes your behavior because that thing was what you relied upon for your identity, and your identity
That's
determines
right.
your behavior.
Well, that's what gives you your up and down. I mean,
Yep.
there's various interpretations, death of God, but one that's
Yep.
relevant for this context is the idea that there is some sort of intersubjective goal orientation that has driven society and now is gone, and we are not aware of
Yep.
it yet, but slowly creeping into our conscience, or sorry, consciousness. You could say conscience, I suppose,
Yep.
but yeah. And so like in the Killing Joke, that's a great point, because in the Killing Joke you see sort of the inherent nihilism within
Yep.
someone sort of emerge, right?
Yep.
And I think to Heidegger and Nietzsche's point, I think what they would try and encourage us to do is realize is that despite the fact that our worlds are contingent, such as the world of the mother, the world of the philosophy student, the world of the podcaster, right? You rely on all
Yep.
these different things to make your possibilities a reality. They can be
Yep.
taken away from you, but when they're taken away, you're still here.
Yep.
We're still
Exactly.
existing together. And so what's left there? Well, the self, like
Hmm.
the nothingness of the self, right? The self, which the Hindus might call Brahman, or Atman in some sense. If you want to take a phenomenological spin on that, right? Of course.
Yep.
But and so nihilism in some sense, that I take Deleuze's interpretation of Nietzsche's take on nihilism as the negation of life in the name of higher values. So you can think of it as we put off living to tomorrow for the sake of something, right?
Yep.
But those things can be taken away from us immediately, and suddenly we realize that we're still alive, that we're here, and we can
Yep.
still have a meaningful life if we choose to, right? But to give into despair and think, oh, I can't have a meaningful life anymore because I'm no longer the thing I used to be, is complete nihilism. It's negating life for the sake of some ideal that no longer exists.
Yep. Yeah, and that's kind of why, at least in my view, why non-attachment is a principle in Buddhism, because if you
Mm-hmm.
attach yourselves to things, I mean, everything dies, everything changes over time, everything will be stripped away from you. So if you attach yourselves to things, you're going to be constantly getting part of your identity will be constantly just deleted from you, basically, if you attach
That's
yourself
right.
to
Yeah, yeah,
things.
yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, which is to mistake yourself for those things, right? I think that's the
Yep.
upshot of that view
Exactly.
is that
Exactly.
you're mistaking yourself for those things. Although I don't know what to take from the view that therefore Buddhism, certain views of Buddhism might say that there is no self,
Mhm. Yeah.
anatta, right? Like or anatman, like there's still something there. It's just not an object. It's not something that
Yeah.
is based in contingency, as it were.
Yeah.
You know.
Yep.
And if we want to, we can make that into an ethic. But that's a project for another day, I suppose.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yeah, I was just making sure you're still there.
Yeah, no, sorry. Every time that my foot touches the cable, my monitors just like go out and everything. Yeah, and it
I
changes.
talk about contingent and impermanence. We don't want to
Yeah,
identify with this conversation so much because
yeah,
it'll be taken away from us. So we must
yep,
embrace
yeah,
the serendipity of the change, right? Embrace possibilities as opposed to be nihilists and say, well, I guess I should give up on everything because I can't more. Oh, well.
yep, exactly, exactly. All right. So this essay kind of goes along a very like postmodern viewpoint of morality. Morality is a social
Mhm.
construct created by people.
Right.
And in your viewpoint, with the, I guess, the conception, the idea that morality is a social construct, does that change the value of morality to someone who's aware of that?
Mm. I really like that question. That one's kind of tricky, and I think this is
Yeah,
sort of the smoke and mirror of Nietzsche, I dare say,
yeah,
because
yeah,
Nietzsche, right, claims to be above morality, but yet he gives up the lie immediately when he says, "I'm going to evaluate the value of values." And say, "What the
yep,
hell? I thought we were I thought we were giving up on values entirely, but instead, no, we're going to judge values themselves." That's
yeah.
kind of weird of you, Nietzsche. But
Mhm.
I was wondering if you could maybe expand on that a little bit more because I could take that a couple of different ways, but I want to make sure I answer your question directly.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of an open question. I because like my thought was, well, hey, um, if let's say society takes on this viewpoint, let's say
Mhm.
everyone comes into consciousness of the idea that morality is just a social construct created by people. There is not I guess, an objective one type
Mm-hmm. Oh, a type
morality.
one objective. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, type one objective morality. There's just a type two objective morality.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
And if, say, everyone started to take this viewpoint on, how would that change the way that people value morality?
Hmm. Well, maybe a good way to frame this question is to say, how would my view of money change if I realized that money is just a social construct? So taking away all objective parameters for
Yep,
money, such as the golden standard, right? And we still use it.
yep,
I think maybe one way to look at it is in terms uh, of its use value, perhaps.
yep, yep,
And I think there's two different ways you can take this. So one way to think about it is kind of like how we described earlier, how atheists sometimes just give into a religion because they just can't live without believing in God. And frankly, some of us are predisposed to
yep,
need to believe in some sort of Hinterwelt two world theory
yep,
of the world to get on with their lives, and that's fine. But it's funny to see people who are self-conscious of that nonetheless do it, right? And so for them, that doesn't change the value of that belief, right? Because it still has a certain
yep,
function within their lives. Um,
right,
although I think you see this objection all the time, though, is that people say, well, if everyone believed that, Dylan, or believe that, Greg, it would just be absolute anarchy because everyone would just do what they want, right?
yeah,
And and a cynical bone in my body wants to say, well, that's why it's necessary for a certain group of people to believe it and others to not. So, as
yep,
Voltaire would say smugly, I don't believe in Christ, but I'm sure as hell glad that my maid does. you know.
Yeah.
Which I think is a little too demeaning, but you could probably take that spin on it if you want.
Well, that's also, I mean, that's under the assumption that people want to kill each other and people want to steal from each other and people, right?
Which kind of betrays the lie almost immediately. Like why should we do that if there was no imperative not to do things? Why not just be
Yep.
kind? Like,
Yeah.
and that's sort of how I say this all the time with people who read Nietzsche, especially Challenge of Morals. They come out of it as some sort of self-interested Ayn Randian type, right?
Yep.
And I just want to kind of look at them and say, you don't get it, do you? He's saying that there is no reason not to do any of those things, which means there is no default character for someone to fall into. Like, it's up to us to decide what to do. Although on a practical scale, I would say on a societal level, there has to be some sort of noble lie. Maybe that's what sort of my cynical side coming out, because I'd say, well, if everyone evaluated values the same way in the way that I'm presenting it here, society couldn't function. There has to be a group of people that do give into the lie a little bit for the rest of us.
Yep. Well, that's kind of, I mean, a lot of things just went through my head with that. One is that if you're watching a movie, for instance, you have to believe the lie of the movie in order to enjoy it a little bit, right? You have to suspend your disbelief, in order to watch the movie, right? Another tangent on that is that with morality, as far as that's concerned, when I first kind of developed the idea that morality is just a social construct, like you, that didn't change the way that I valued morality. I still did, quote unquote, moral things. I still believed that I should be moral, right? I still believed in that. Even though I knew that it was a social construct, I knew that it's just invented by humanity in the same way that, say, chimpanzees learn what they should and shouldn't do around other chimpanzees, right? Don't steal each other's food or whatever, you're going to get wrestled onto, right?
Get wrestled onto. That's a very couched way to say that. They do a lot worse things, but yes.
But
absolutely.
It doesn't change the way that you behave because it has all right, I am sorry. It happened to me again.
No, it's okay. As long as I can hear you, that's good.
This is the first time I've recorded a podcast with both my monitors here, because I got a new kind of adapter that allows me to plug into both of them.
That's really cool. I couldn't help noticing that you going back and forth. You haven't done those previous podcasts, so good to know. Now I know why you do that.
Yep, exactly. Sweet. Well, so I kind of want to say, going back to, we've talked about money a lot when it comes to value. I want to say, on the subject of value, something which aligns very well with your theory is money. Money only has value if people believe and agree that it has value. So in your view, how does money tie into society's shared moral system? Why do people wince when they see other people like rip a dollar bill or something like that?
That's actually a really good question. And my honest answer is I don't know, because as a matter of fact, I'm currently rereading The Wealth of Nations in preparation for my cover-to-cover take on capital, and to really get down to this idea of what money is. But I think one way to think about it, I suppose, and this is just a thought that comes off the top of my head, because this may not be my most, maybe I could give a better answer if I was more lucid, but I would say for now, we perhaps hate it because it gives up the lie, so to speak. Like, if someone demonstrates to the rest of us that they can live without money, that we somewhat resent that, because we've all somewhat, so whether or not we consciously know it, we've all intersubjectively agreed that this is the game that we're playing, right? And that what you're doing is compromising the game. And you even see this in chimpanzees, right? Like, they have ways of doing things, and when someone breaks the rules, we hate that. And we want to push against that, because it breaks out of the agreement that makes intersubjective interpersonal behavior manageable, right? So like the thing that makes me regulated when I go into public and not afraid that someone's going to jump and kill me is because we're all kind of unconsciously agreed to that we're not going to do that, right?
Yeah.
But if I'm thrown into a situation where I don't know what the hell anyone's going to do at any part of the moment, like utter chaos, then of course I'm going to be like, in a state where I wish that was the case. I wish we all could agree that we wouldn't do those sort of things. And that's sort of where you can kind of get into the mindset of why drastic political movements like fascism emerge, right? So this overreaction towards chaos to try to establish some sort of order. Like even if that order is absolutely evil, it's more preferable for some people than the chaos that emerges from not knowing what someone's going to do next, right?
Yeah, because they're afraid.
They're afraid, right? Exactly. And I think it takes a certain courage, right, to even do what we're doing right now, which is to critique the popular assumption or interpretation of value as a type 1 objectivity, right? And some people just don't have the stomach for it, unfortunately.
Yep. Yeah. I like what you said earlier. You were saying something along the lines of people wins because you've kind of shown them the lie, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I want to say that once, and I've said this story before on the podcast, but once in my fraternity, I was like we had this like educative program going on where you'd like hang out with your pledge class or whatever, and you'd like give them some kind of lesson. And
Mm-hmm.
mine was I wanted to show them something about money and like the value of it. So
Mm.
we were kind of sitting in a circle, and I pulled out a dollar bill. And I was like, how does this make you guys feel? And then I just ripped it in half. And the interesting thing was the only person that really showed a big reaction to it, who was like, why would you do that? Why would you do that? Was the wealthiest person in the group.
Oh, that's so interesting.
Yeah, and like I knew he was like everyone knew he was wealthy. His family has
Uh-huh.
lots of money and everything, and it was just so psychologically interesting to me that he was the only person who had a bad reaction to it.
Mm-hmm. Well, because it gives him power, right? That's how
Yep,
he obtains what he needs. Think
yep,
of it the Simikian sense. Like the fact that he gave up the lie has taken that the meaning of that object away from the
yep,
context, and
exactly.
kind of unconsciously attacks his identity in some sense, right?
Yeah.
Whether or not he knows, he just hates it. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, well, in the same way that like a drug addict would wince if you like flushed heroin down the toilet, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if we attach our identity to something and someone, takes that away from us, it makes us wince, right?
Yes. Yeah, it sort of exposes us as being somewhat inauthentic.
Yeah,
This kind of brings me back to sort of Heidegger's often misinterpreted sense of authenticity, which again maybe I'm misinterpreting here, but we'll see. It's sort of to identify yourself with that which you're not. This sort of rough way of speaking about inauthenticity. So you think of like attaching to one particular identity over another, right? As being me. Like I am a mom, I am a philosophy student, I am a podcaster. But these are all just identities and roles that we've picked up to our context. It's not
yeah,
who we are essentially as Dasein or as existing beings, right? And I think the liberating effect of things like ripping money, for instance, is that it allows us to be freed up from our identities. I think
yeah,
to your point earlier, people are so afraid of losing their identity that they'll do anything to keep it. But
yeah,
that's nihilistic, right? So like the proper response to that is to accept the fact that we'll still be here and that who we are isn't necessarily the person with all the money in the room, for
yeah.
instance. Yeah.
No, and I was having a creative rut um, for a while, for like a few
Mm-hmm.
months, and I found that what I felt I really needed to do was just get rid of all my notebooks and remove everything from my computer. So I had to just completely
Mm-hmm.
start fresh on totally new ideas. And I feel like that's definitely helped one, free a lot of stress from my mind because I don't feel like I'm attached to those older things anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And I can
Mm-hmm.
I'm able to express myself in a different way where I don't feel locked into these other perspectives that I've written down, I've been trying to work on for a while now. So I
Absolutely.
think,
Yeah.
yeah, so I think being able to expand your identity onto other things, being able like not, I guess, even being willing to unattach yourself to things can also
Mhm.
help you expand and grow as your own identity.
Well, it opens up possibilities for being, because sometimes we
Yep.
get so locked in our world of concerns that we can't even see a possibility shimmering out here in the corner of my consciousness that could lead
Yep.
into a much more fulfilling life. That's literally what it means being unauthentic, is putting off till tomorrow my possibilities, which is why the consciousness of the impossibility of further possibility, i.e., death, forces me not to put off till tomorrow what I could be seizing within my world today. You know, um, and you think of the dangers of ideals in that way. What you said reminded me of the Zen koan. If you see the Buddha in the street, kill him. Like that kind of attitude.
Yep.
It's like, why do they say that? It's like, well, because if you idolize the Buddha, you're missing what the Buddha is teaching you, which is not attachment, because
Yep.
now you've been attached to
Yep.
this ideal.
Yep.
Absolutely.
So with that, I'd like to move on to a foray into ontology.
Mm,
Would you mind if I read the first paragraph of your essay?
not at all. Please.
Okay. I'm also going to share my screen so people on YouTube could see it. Let's problem with this Zoom is that it always has a little thing right there.
Yeah, no worries. Now, I realize I'm going to be exposed to the cold and careless eye of posterity. So if you see any misspellings, please forgive me. I did not have an editor.
Hey, that is all right. That is all right. A foray into ontology. Introduction. What is there? This is called the ontological question. It is the task of metaphysics to answer the ontological question. But this task presupposes that metaphysicians are in possession of some interpretation of the question in order to answer it. For suppose the metaphysician did not interpret the question. If so, then the metaphysician would not understand how to answer it. If this is the case, then it follows that metaphysics is impossible because the ontological question would never have occurred as a question to be answered at all. But metaphysicians do interpret this question. This calls for an examination of their interpretations of the question on the basis of which answers to this question are provided. So first and foremost, what does this mean? What are you trying to say here?
I'm trying to draw attention to the possibility of metaphysics.
Yeah,
So in other words, what makes metaphysics possible, but not in the factive sense of I'm going to talk to you about certain objective conditions that make metaphysics possible, but in the sense, what do we mean when we do by what is there
yep,
or what is
yep,
metaphysics, right? The way I understand metaphysics currently is that it is the branch of philosophy that answers the most fundamental questions of what entities are. So, for example, what the most fundamental entity is, or what Heidegger would call ontotheological questions. That could be atoms and void, like it was for some of the pre-Socratics. It could be God in the Christian sense. It could be many different things. The point, though, is that we have some sort of fundamental entity. Another metaphysical question would be like, what's the essence of an entity? So what is an entity insofar as it's an entity at all times and places, right? Whether it's God, whether it's a human being, whether it's a cup of beer. But my current understanding, though, is that all these questions presuppose that we've already answered the question of what entities are, or what
yeah,
entities there are, I should say, because I can't answer the question of what the most fundamental entity is unless I had some sort of like list of entities to choose from. So go, okay, there, God, or atoms and void, or whatever. So before we can even answer these other derivative metaphysical questions, which are equally metaphysical in some sense, we have to address the question of what entities are, in the sense of which entities exist. Now, the point I draw to is that when we ask this question, what do we even mean by existence? The one way to think about it is when I say what is there, to before I can even say there is X, I have to have been given the what. If I did not have some sort of preconception of the entities that were available in my domain to say, okay, these ones exist, these ones do not, I couldn't even answer the question, regardless of how I understand that there is. Like I can understand that there is as being actual as opposed to possible, or as being physical as opposed to being mental, right? So you think of like realists as saying, or materialists as saying, something is not real or existent unless it has, non-transcendent properties like being within space and time, right? But that's the there is. The what, on the other hand, has to be presented first in order for me to even do anything with the concept of existence. So when metaphysicians answer the question, what I'm saying is they already know what entities are and what kinds of entities there are in some sort of second order sense before they can come in and say, of those entities that are in some sort of second order sense, that there's these ones that exist in this derivative sense of existence and these ones do not.
So what is an entity?
Mm-hmm. And that's interesting. So this is jumping way ahead.
Yep, that's fine. That's fine.
But an entity, I would say, is something that has being.
Okay.
And so you can think of an entity as that which is determined by our sense of being. So, for instance, we might say that Santa Claus doesn't exist,
Yep.
right? But Santa Claus has to be, in some sense, before I could say it exists or not. And there's a sort of interesting pseudo problem I see lots of philosophers get into when they say, oh, does Santa Claus exist or not? And they say, well, obviously it's there in some sense. So it must exist in some way, like as a concept or a notion or whatnot. But that totally misunderstands the point, because the idea is that nonetheless being is something distinct from the assertion of whether or not, say, Santa Claus exists. And I would say what determines the existence of the entity in this case would be something like a stricture and what it means for something to exist, right? So again, going back to the idea of is actual, is not actual, as sort of the categories of existence and non-existence respectively. Before we could do that, though, Santa Claus has to be. Now, what determines the being of Santa Claus? Well, it's not existence or not existence, because unless there's some sort of higher order sense of beingness, I couldn't even say whether or not Santa Claus existed. It'd be non-existent for me, like to the sense that would be nonsense. I couldn't say it is or isn't. Yeah.
So I guess can you kind of further elaborate on the difference between being and existence?
Sure. So, and this is sort of where we get into sort of distant waters, because the notion of being can be poetically put as the horizon within which we understand things, right?
Okay.
So, kind of going back to the Coke bottle example, we can say that there is, empirically speaking, a phenomenon that has emerged there. But in order to understand that as an object, to recognize it in the Kantian sense as an object at all, we had to have some sort of sense of being that allows something like that to be interpreted in such a manner that it comes out to us as something to be discovered, right? And so, like, if I went to the island nation we described earlier and I asked, do you have a Coke bottle there? They'd be like, what the hell are you talking about? Like, what you're saying is utter nonsense, because the idea of a Coke, soda, the context in which we take for granted for this thing to exist in this sense of being is not present to them, right? It's only after they have that sort of sense of what a Coke bottle is, they can go, yes, it does exist here, right? I don't know if that helps elaborate. It's somewhat abstract, but hopefully that makes it clearer.
I guess things can exist. Like it can't exist unless it has a sense of being. That sense of being is almost your awareness of it, or its existence as sort of like a concept or an entity. So I'm thinking the Coke, does it have a being before they know it exists? Or does it exist before they know it has a being?
So I would say it can only exist if it has being. And again, in the transcendental sense, that we're not saying in the type 1 objective sense that there isn't something there that we would understand as a Coke bottle, because that's what makes the proposition true, right? So kind of going back to the idea of the girl saying, look at those chickens, and she points at ducks, for instance. If she lived in a world, let's say, It didn't even have the category of duck, right?
Mm-hmm.
The question of are there ducks couldn't even make sense to her. Not in the sense that there isn't something there in the phenomenological sense that
Yeah.
could be interpreted in that way. It's that that object couldn't even be recognized as a duck to begin with because she lacks that sense of being that allows that to be there for her.
Yeah.
And I would avoid using terms even like concepts, right? Because the girl or the child who's calling those ducks chickens is not necessarily doing it in a conceptual way. She's sort of testing the boundaries of what kind of categories we've already taught her. I didn't even explicitly say that's a chicken, that's a duck. Maybe she just learned that through exposure, right?
Yeah.
Kind of the same way that, whether or not we'd like to admit it, we kind of fall into our gender roles from day one simply by seeing how my father interacts with my mom, right? I
Yeah.
don't even think of it conceptually. I don't have, like I said earlier, an intellectualist assumption of what a man is. I just be a man. I have
Yeah.
being a man means something to me, right? But this meaning is not
Mm-hmm.
conceptual.
Yeah.
But if you don't even, but if you're not tapped into the context or the history that even makes that possible, then how can you even make sense of the question, is there Coke on your island? Because they have no clue what you mean.
Yeah.
Another way to look at it too, I suppose, might be to critique the analytic philosophical tradition for creating this sort of confusion too. So, for example, Heidegger has this very infamous phrase, the nothing nothings. Now, what he meant
Mm-hmm.
by nothing is actually what we referred to earlier, which is the contingency of our identities based off of the mortality of our worlds, right?
Yeah.
But when people at Carnap read that statement, the way they interpret it in their ontology was completely nonsensical, right? Because they're trying to think of it in terms of the existential quantifier. And so
Yeah.
suddenly Carnap is forced to say it's not true or false. It's just nonsense. It's just stupid, and so we want to push back and say, well, hang on, a Carnap. Just because it's nonsense doesn't mean it's really nonsense. Maybe Heidegger's trying to talk about something here that you don't know about, right? And maybe you're not privy to that information because you're not a part of that context that gives you the sort of the hints as to what that is. And so that's maybe another way of looking at that too. Like for Carnap, the nothing couldn't nothing to begin with because there is nothing for him to nothing, as it were,
Yeah.
in his ontology.
So I did want to ask why were you motivated to write this essay?
Hmm. Let me think. There's a few motivations.
Yeah.
First off, the had to do a lot to do with my context. So when I went to University of Idaho, the faculty there, for the most part, is analytically oriented. Certain
Yeah.
of its members aren't,
Yeah.
but I really wanted to uh, engage with the analytic tradition. There's a sort
Mm-hmm.
of saying in geology that if you study geology on the East Coast in your undergraduate courses, you take your graduate courses on the West Coast. And that's sort of my orientation because I was very
Yeah.
familiar with Heidegger, et cetera, but I really wanted to take seriously the analytic perspective because I sympathize with it hard because
Yeah.
it's really noble, I think, to try to communicate clearly and in a consistent manner,
Yeah.
right? So there's something to that. But I wanted to sort of communicate in a way that analytic philosophers on their own terms could understand the limitations of their orientation to philosophy and to sort
Yeah.
of offer a bridge. Because all I see is nothing but straw manning and tribalism between the two camps. And I wanted to try to reconcile that
Yeah.
and say, no, you're both legitimate, but you're true, but partial perspectives here, right?
Yeah.
So this is why, in other words, like the reason that, like for example, analytic metaphysics can't get at its own basic assumptions is because those assumptions are non-propositional. And that doesn't make it hopeless. It just means that we have to approach it differently, right?
Yeah. So we've kind of brushed past this a very kind of at the beginning and right now as we're talking about this, but I did kind of want to ask you to elaborate on the difference between analytical and continental philosophy.
It's funny. I would say that that division depends on who you ask.
Yeah.
I think it's so like some people think that to study Hegel is to do literature and to do real philosophy like of the mind you should do cognitive science, for instance.
Hmm.
Um, and there's something to be said for that, I think, because
Yeah.
Hegel is incredibly esoteric, and I don't blame people for giving up on him. But I would say that given what we've just stated currently,
Yeah.
uh, that what makes analytic philosophy analytic, in the sense that we're referring to it, not in general,
Yeah.
is that they would say the only concern of philosophers are what we can state in domains, what's truth functionally
Mm.
applicable, right? So I can imagine a metaphysician saying, I don't care how the entities get there, just give me a domain and I'll generate general propositions about them, right? So like, which one's fundamental, which ones exist, what conditions do they all have in common, right?
Yeah.
They don't care about how they got there. They're just interested in the fact that they're there, and that we're just going to investigate them, right? So in that sense, you can think of them as trying to be the foundation of science in some sense, like methodologically. But then on the other hand, though, we want to dare the question, well, why are they there? Why is
Yeah.
there something rather than nothing? Like, I'm not content just to be given entities, as a matter of fact, and to state general propositions about them, you know. And so when we dare to ask those questions, then we're kind of come up against a wall of language, right? Like, we're
Yeah.
forced to confront the fact that our language is limited and they can't really express everything that we know is there, or we intimate is there, but is not being validated by our forms of expression, right? And so in some sense, you could think of sort of implicit nihilism in the analytic perspective, which says, well, we shouldn't talk about those things anymore, right? Which happen to be the most important things, such as like how to
Yeah.
live or how things
Yeah.
got there in the first place. Let's not talk about the mystery. The mystery is nonsense. But then existentially, though, we're all like, well, hang on a second here. No, I will talk about it, gosh darn it, even if it kills me. And that's sort of the attitude I can see being represented by the continental perspective.
Yeah.
The only problem I have with it, of course, is that it can easily border on esoteric nonsense if you're not in the know, right? So it
Yeah.
becomes very clique-esque, which
Yeah.
I do resent. So I hope someday we can breach out of that.
Yeah. No, I 100% agree with you. It can become this thing where they are kind of just, I guess, almost speaking in this other language that it seems so true because it appeals to your emotions and everything. But the reality is
Mhm.
that it doesn't really have any content to it. It doesn't actually hold any um, philosophical weight, I guess, in a sense.
Well, I would qualify that and say it's not that it doesn't have any content. It's just that the content it's trying to denote can be very hard to grasp.
Yeah.
One way to think
Yeah.
of it is that terms like Geworfenheit, for instance, thrownness, is not a
Yeah.
concept, but is a formal uh, reference to something that we phenomenologically encounter. So it's not something
Yeah.
that is truth functionally apt, right? That's kind of the weird thing about this, is that phenomenologically things are just true in some sort of deeper sense than what we mean in first order logic by true or false, right? Um, and unless you had encountered that phenomenon, there's no way you can know what the hell I mean by Geworfenheit, right? So this sort of suspension of belief when you engage with people like Heidegger, you want to be charitable and say, okay, I'm listening. What do you mean by this?
Yeah.
And that's sort of my approach. It can be very frustrating, but ultimately it's kind of worthwhile because eventually you get to see what they're talking about in your own experiences. And you go, God damn it, it was there all along. I just didn't have the word for it, but here it is.
Yeah.
But where to draw that line though is not entirely clear, because I could think of certain people like Derrida, for instance, who do border on the nonsensical, and it's kind of hard to see what they mean by something, for sure.
Yeah. A lot of this is kind of um, what you've alluded to a few times in the podcast is how things almost don't exist for us until we have a word for it.
Hmm. Hmm.
And it's kind of
Yeah.
something I'm reminded of this passage from I think it's the book of John in the Bible. I haven't read it, but I've heard people talk about it, and it's something along the lines of, in the beginning there was the Word and only the Word,
Mm.
and the Word created reality, or
Hmm.
something along the lines of that. And it's kind of
Yes.
that. is, I mean, something as, I guess, old as that being written, that's been something that we as a humanity have kind of thought and believed in um, for ages, right? For
Hmm.
millennia. And I guess it's not surprising to me that that's something that we still kind of hold as a belief today, especially in your foray of ontology.
Hmm.
So I kind of wanted to ask, as far as being in existence goes, where does language kind of play its role in?
Um, Poetically, you could say language is the house of being. You can almost
Mm,
say that they're the same thing. I would say, but language again in the deeper phenomenological sense, right? Not in the sense of what we mean by a set of syntax rules, right? Which is what we
yeah,
think, or linguistic rules, right? Um, and and I think that plays well into sort of the idea of why, for instance, people prefer natural languages as opposed to constructed languages. Because I have this habit of studying Esperanto. Char Esperanto es tre facile because it's easy, but what it lacks though from other languages is the fact that the languages we speak have been lived in. Like no one's
mhm,
died speaking Esperanto that I'm aware of. They use their
yeah,
mother tongue when they're talking to the children, right? And it's sort of that lived experience is being imbued within language, that history that gives it meaning, right? This depth to it that's
yeah,
non-propositional, and we inherit that, right? And that's what makes things stand out to us as something meaningful to begin with. Like even the concept of death is something historically received. Now of course the upshot of the phenomenological perspective on this is that that's not the end of the matter though, because if all we had was just that understanding that makes things be for us, we would just, throw our hands up and go, well, there's nothing more to talk about. Well, actually there is. For instance, like we were talking about earlier, when that Coke ball washes up on the shore and none
yeah,
of our categories can quite describe it, someone has to address that phenomenon, right? Even if they have to make no sense for a while.
yeah,
Like I think of, like, the idea of subject and object being absolute nonsense for a while before someone finally began to understand it. And now it's such a standard conception of the human experience that we can't see the world without it.
yeah. Well, I think that's a good place to leave it off. But I did want to ask you, kind of as a last question, where are you going? What are your next steps in philosophy? What are your next steps in your field? Where can people find you? What's going on, Dylan?
Well, that's a really tough question to answer because the honest truth is, talk about the mortalities of our worlds. I don't know because nothing's
Yep,
guaranteed me. But I'm trying to cultivate possibilities within my world currently to go to a PhD program or a graduate program
perfect.
within the next year or so. Currently, I'm just working part time as a librarian because I find that at the ethically for myself the most fulfilling position in society.
Dude, that's
Uh,
awesome.
uh, Thank you. Yeah, no, it's wonderful to be able to engage with the public and say, "Have you heard of Schopenhauer?" And then sort of slide them the
Yeah.
the title of the book and have them get back to me. But so yeah, so I'll be doing that for the next year. I'll be laying low while working on my graduate packet, working with faculty that's taught me at the University of Idaho to write, schmoozy, letters of recommendation so I can get into a good program, all those kinds of things. So just holding out for that and seeing what happens, embracing the anxiety latent within that too, because there's this huge pressure in society to take the easy way out and to make money. I come from a family of attorneys. I would be the fifth one in a row if I decided to go to law school. But unfortunately, all those uh, uh, through systematic breeding, they finally created a mind that is not just good for litigating, but for thinking. So I hope I
Yep.
can use that to philosophy. To reach me, people can reach me by my email. I could probably, you're free to give it in the description of the video or wherever you want to post this.
Sounds
Um,
good.
uh, yeah, and that's it for now. I mean, I hope to publish some stuff soon so I can engage with the public and hear what other people have to say, like you, because I live for these sorts of things. I love to talk to fellow human beings about why we're here. So thanks for being here with me today. Thanks for having me.
Hey, thanks for being here too, Dylan. All right, everybody. Thanks for listening. That was Dylan James. Take it easy.